after the communist model failed throughout history, why do you think that there's still a prominent sense of hope that this type of government can work? Well, never posit malevolence as a motivator when ignorance will do. So that's the first thing. Well, look, you know, this is one of the things that really shocked me in the course of my career as a university professor. Most of my students, the bulk of my students were second-year university students, and they took my course, personality course, which I released online, and which some of you might have watched some of anyways. Most of them knew something about World War II and what happened under Hitler and the Holocaust and all of that. Not a lot, but some. They at least knew it happened and that it was bad. It happened, it was large, and it was bad. And that's something, at least. But they didn't know anything about what happened in the Soviet Union. You know, the first time that most of the students that I knew ever encountered the fact that something on the order of, who knows, 20 to 50 million people were demolished as a consequence of internal repression in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 1959. None of them knew that. And they certainly didn't know that twice that number had perished under Mao. And so that was just an absolute bloody mystery to me. It's like, really? What the hell? How can they not know that? Especially given also that it wasn't just all those deaths, non-trivial as they were. And then, of course, the deaths were just the worst part of the horror, because for every person who died, there were endless numbers of people who were demolished in other ways, like by having a family member killed, or by being tortured, or silenced, or the number of miserable ways to live in a society like that are endless. And then we fought a Cold War about it, and armed ourselves to the teeth with thermonuclear bombs. I don't know what you know about hydrogen bombs, but here's a fun fact. You know, the atomic bomb was what was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? And to great effect, let's say. You know that a hydrogen bomb has an atomic bomb as a trigger. So that's the difference between a hydrogen bomb and just a standard fission bomb. The fission bomb is just what gets the bomb going if it's a hydrogen bomb. And so we armed ourselves to the teeth with tens of thousands of hydrogen bombs. Why? Well, in the West, to defend ourselves, let's say, against whatever it was that had killed 20 to 40, 50 million people in the Soviet Union. And that lasted from, say, about 1950 to 1989. But it's still there. There's still North Korea, and there's still Russia is still armed to the teeth. So we're not out of that, but you know, it's not as serious a threat as it was, I don't think. So not only did all those people die in all those different countries, to no positive end whatsoever, but then we almost put the whole planet to the torch, and no one knows anything about it. It's like, well, what the hell? This is one of the things that annoys me so much about the universities, I would say, primarily, because the fact that students are ignorant about that, I think, can be laid firmly at the feet of the universities. It's their fault, period. So, some of it with younger people who are idealistic, some of the fact that they can be idealistic about radical left utopias is merely a consequence of ignorance. You know, and it's not that surprising that people might be attracted by notions of egalitarian utopianism because, well, there's the negative end, which is, well, if you're young and poor and outside the power hierarchies, it's all to the delight of your envy and resentment that the whole system is corrupt and that's why you're powerless. And that's the cynical view of attraction for utopia. But then, and I think there's definitely something to that. But then on the other hand, you know, if you walk down Bloor Street and you see people sleeping on, or downtown Toronto, or worse, in downtown in many American cities where there's tent cities and many, many homeless people. No one walks down the street like that and thinks, oh, hooray for inequality, or great, look at all the poverty. It aren't things functioning well. I mean, if you have any compassion, which, by the way, is an overrated virtue as a standalone virtue, but it still has its place. If you have any compassion and you walk down the street and you see that sort of thing, you wish that it didn't have to be that way. And then you might imagine, well, if the resources, the excess resources that some people seem to have, were only distributed in a more fair manner, then perhaps the fact that people fall out of society at the bottom could be rectified. And so, why wouldn't you think that if you were young and tender-hearted? And there's something about that that's positive, because somebody needs to speak for the dispossessed, because there are those who are dispossessed, and sometimes it's part and parcel of their own doing, and sometimes it's just the bitter catastrophe of fate. And so it would be lovely if we could figure out how to have that not be the case. And so on the positive side, that's what drives the utopianism of the left, and there's definitely something about that. The dispossessed need a political voice, and that's the proper function of the left. So it's an amalgam of ignorance, which is unforgivable, but understandable in the case of people who are young. Resentment, bitterness, and cynicism about the system as it is, that's unwarranted and only driven by jealousy. Genuine concern about the fact that power hierarchies do become corrupt and privilege the people at the top. Compassion for the dispossessed, and also the capability of human beings to envision what a better future might be. It's some amalgam of all of those things. And it is genuinely difficult for people, everyone, to understand exactly when it is that even compassion for the dispossessed transforms itself into a political ideology that would be absolutely murderous if it was implemented. Because that's another thing about the left. We figured out how to box in the radical right. Basically, we say, look, if you're making claims of ethnic and racial superiority in an essential sense, then you're not part of the acceptable political dialogue. That might be a lesson of World War II. And we know that the right can go too far, as they did in Nazi Germany. On the left, we also know that people can go too far and have, in fact, gone way too far, but we can't figure out exactly when. And some of that's because of all this ignorance and the other factors that are already laid out, but some of it is because we actually don't know when. Because it's very hard to point to a particular left-leaning doctrine, like a single one, and say, that's the cause of espousing that means that you've gone too far. It's more like it's the combination of 4 or 5 things when extended too dramatically that conspire to produce the catastrophic outcome. And it's very hard to point to what it is. I have the opportunity, so this is something that's happened to me in the last few months that's been a great thing. I'm writing the preface to the 50th anniversary edition of the Gulag Archipelago. So I have the opportunity to reread it, and the abridged version, which was an authorized abridged version. And I mean, it struck me on this rereading the same as it had when I read it years ago and reread it years ago. It's an absolutely compelling read. It's an absolutely brilliant book. It's completely horrifying. And one of the things that's really horrifying about it is how fast the Russian Revolution went out of hand. Because you kind of think, well, the people who were engaged in utopian thinking were motivated positively, and then it degenerated over like 10 years or 5 years, whatever, sort of that culminating in Stalin. It's like, that isn't what happened, man. It went really bad right away. And really right away. It was murderous right from the beginning. And I think it's partly because, and this is why, following Carl Jung, people have to develop a real sense of their shadow, of their dark side. It's like, you think you're standing up compassionately for the dispossessed, but it could easily be your resentment and your hatred for the accomplished and well, let's say for the accomplished, competent, and wealthy that's driving your actions. And so what you confuse your hatred with love. And if you look at what happened in the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, it's certainly the case that those who were dominated by hatred immediately got the upper hand. And so that was true sociologically. And that might mean that those who were fundamentally motivated by hatred also just killed off everyone who was actually motivated by compassion. Or it might have meant that even among those who thought they were motivated by compassion, when they had the opportunity to manifest their hatred took the upper hand. And something like that certainly happened. So not knowing about all that can lead you down the same garden path, and that seems to be what's happening on the radical left now, as far as I can tell. So, I guess that's the answer to that.